Think about the greatest and most well-known Australian bands. AC/DC, INXS, Midnight Oil, Silverchair. One thing they all had in common was success overseas. Although some of the greatest Australian bands never got the overseas attention that they may have deserved, yet they're still considered to be some of the best in this country. One band that comes to mind in that category is Powderfinger. Powderfinger became one of Australia's most popular and successful alternative rock bands over the past 30 years. And in this video, I'm going to look at how they did that and why they became one of the most widely adored Australian rock bands, especially in the dad rock crowd. So Powderfinger were formed in 1989 by some school friends in Brisbane, namely Ian Hogue, John Collins, and a guy called Steve Bishop. They started out playing covers, and one artist that they liked to cover was Neil Young, who had a song called Powderfinger, where they got their name from. Later, when they went to university, they met up with a guy called Bernard Fanning, who they loved because he could sing great, and he was introduced as the singer of the group. They also met a guy called John Coghill at university, who took over drumming from Stephen Bishop, and later in 1992, they added a second guitarist by the name of Darren Middleton. In the early 90s, they began playing the local Brisbane scene and releasing music independently. Building up a small but strong local following, they eventually were signed to a record label in 1994 and released their first album with them called Parables for Wooden Ears. As far as first albums for iconic bands go, this has to be one of the most interesting ones because it is considered to be pretty bad, even by the band's own admission.
We actually listened to Parables, bits of it the other day, and we were just pissing ourselves.
And the record company came in and listened to it and just looked at each other and went, what have we done? Who have we signed here?
The album was also a commercial flop, and you can understand why. I mean, the music that they were going for was just too much. It was too all over the place. The influences were kind of going in a metal direction and a grunge direction at the same time, as well as being extremely progressive. It also came across as a little inauthentic. I mean, look at these film clips. Bernard Fanning looks like he's trying to imitate Chris Cornell so hard, and they're clearly just trying to hop onto the grunge Seattle scene a little too much. But with the failure of their debut album, that didn't turn them away from music, and they knuckled down to start to write better music for their second album. And in 1996, they released their second album, Double Allergic. And this album was the breakout success for Powderfinger. The album, and in particular the single, Pick You Up, I'll be the one to pick you up again, received a lot of airtime on Triple J, Australia's government-funded youth radio station that played all over the country, and the album eventually made it to number 4 on the charts. And the reason why I think this album was so much more popular than their first was because they simply wrote much better songs. And they admitted themselves that they were just trying way too much on Parables, and Double Allergic, they just stripped it back and took to the old adage of less is more. After the success of that, they toured with UMI, who were essentially considered to be the biggest and most popular Australian alternative rock band at the time, which helped them grow even more of a following.
And it was on that tour where Pick You Up had just come out as a single. Every time that song started, night by night, incrementally, you could feel the audience, this frisson, and they were like, oh my God, this is that single.
And 3 of their songs reached Triple J's Hottest 100 in 1996. So with the weight of expectation on their third album, they knuckled down to release what was their breakout commercial success, Internationalist, as their third album. Now, Internationalist is my personal favorite Powderfinger album. And why does this album work so well, and why did it become so popular? Well, there's a few reasons. Number 1, they stuck to what they did before, keeping it simple yet effective with their songs. They also decided to dabble in subtle political commentary, and I believe did it in an extremely effective way that wasn't too much in your face. And that was in response to some of the stuff that was coming out in the 90s from the likes of Pauline Hanson about nationalistic identity, hence the title Internationalist and the almost ironic propaganda style cover art they came out with, which I believe is iconic. Also, the debut single they put out was their most politically aware one, being The Day You Come, which was an extremely bold move, but it paid off. It's a strange song when you think about it. It's got a bouncy rhythm to it. It doesn't feel or sound like there's anything special, but the way the song moves along is just perfection. Also, the lyrics, as I mentioned before, was subtly pointing out issues with some of Pauline Hanson's ideas, which just, you know, came across as a little bit racist. Some of the other singles on this album also had great success too, those being Passenger and Don't Want to Be Left Out. The Day You Come actually won Single of the Year at the ARIA Awards too. And in 1999, after their growing success, they were approached by a filmmaker named Gregor Jordan to write music for his new film that he was bringing out called Two Hands, which starred a young up-and-coming Heath Ledger. Now, this movie, in my opinion, was like an Australian version of Pulp Fiction, and what Bernard Fanning and the band came up with as the crescendo song for the film was These Days. Now, These Days has gone on to become essentially Powderfinger's most fan-appreciated song, and it was the one that they would often finish their live shows with. The song was actually released as a B-side to Passenger when they brought out that song as a single, and obviously on the soundtrack of Two Hands. They also used the Powderfinger song Belter in the film too, and there was just so much love for this song in particular that it hit number 1 on Triple J's Hottest 100 of that year, 1999. Powderfinger were then asked to write music for the second Mission Impossible movie, which would be filmed in Australia, and that's where they came out with their song My Kind of Scene, which brings us to 2000, when they brought out their most popular and well-known album, Odyssey Number 5. Now, this is their highest selling album too. It went 8 times platinum in Australia. It included the song that they recorded for Two Hands, These Days, but in a re-recorded version, as well as My Kind of Scene. But the most successful song to come out of this album, though, was of course My Happiness. Now, this song was just so popular all over Australia. It got played on all sorts of radio stations. It was a commercial and alternative success. It had a really cool film clip too with a slinky, which also propelled its notoriety. My Happiness also came in at number 1 on Triple J's Hottest 100, making them, even to this day, the only band to hit Hottest 100's number 1 2 years in a row. And due to their newfound commercial success with this song, they essentially became the go-to new Australian band for classic rock stations too, like Triple M.
Oh, yeah.
All we do on this station is play your music, so we might as well get you on. It's either you or Dave Grohl on repeat.
Now, with the huge amount of success they had in Australia, essentially being the most popular current Australian rock band, they thought, why not go overseas and see what happens? Although for some reason, despite their attempts and tours overseas, it just never worked out. People just did not get into Powderfinger in the Americas or Europe. And I think due to that, they thought, you know, why bother trying? And they just focused in on their Australian audience. After a couple of years off, they knuckled down to get ready for their 4th album. But this time, with all their success and the live shows they've been doing, they thought, we just really want to make an album to rock out to. And they took more influence from classic rock bands like Led Zeppelin, AC/DC, the Rolling Stones. And they came out with their rockiest album, Vulture Street, which was released in 2003. And once again, it was a huge success. In particular, their first song, Baby, I've Got You On My Mind, which even to this day is still used as a great pump-up song for sporting events. Baby, I got you on my mind. And it's a great song to start a set list with. Other songs like Sunsets, Love Your Way, and Since You've Been Gone were also big successes, and 3 of their songs hit the Hottest 100 top 10. But after all this success, they thought, hey, let's have a break, and they announced they were going on a hiatus. They put out a best of album, which also included this new song, Bless My Soul, another one that I think is a great song of theirs. And they all went to work on some different projects. But the most noticeable, obviously, was lead singer Bernard Fanning, who brought out his debut solo record in 2005, Tea and Sympathy. Now, side note, this is an amazing album, and I still kind of feel like it's underappreciated to this day. It actually won the ARIA for Best Album that year, but we don't get enough people talking about how good this album is, I don't think. And now with Bernard's noticeable success as a solo musician, they got back together in 2007 to bring out their 5th album, Dream Days at the Hotel Existence, with the first single being Lost and Running.
I'm still lost and running. I can't get enough.
Now, this was a successful first single and a relatively successful album, but by the band's own admission, it was a little bit all over the place. The songs were not as cohesive, but, still good songs. And they kind of said in hindsight that they wished that they had gone back to what they used to do before, which was jamming the songs out together and coming up with them as a group. Apparently, they all kind of came up with the songs individually this time and presented them to the band as already kind of made demos, and I think it kind of came out differently, which meant that this album, was still good, but just didn't really come across and connect with Powderfinger and Australian fans as much. They also got together around this time with fellow big heavyweight band from Australia, Silverchair, to do the Across the Great Divide Australian tour. Now, this arguably was their biggest tour they've ever done, with the two bands coming together to play massive shows all over Australia, and they really reached out to every kind of part of the country too. The idea of the shows was to bring light and knowledge to the divide in Australian culture between Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people. In 2008, they were invited to play at the AFL Grand Final, where they pumped up the crowd. Now, if you get invited to play at this event, that pretty much means you've made it as a huge commercial success in Australia. That is pretty much our Super Bowl. And in 2009, they brought out what would become their final album, Golden Rule. Now, at the time of making the album, I've heard that they thought maybe in the back of their minds that this would be their last one, but after it was released and after it was received quite well, they thought, we want to go out on top. They went across the country for the last time, playing big stadium shows to pretty much every capital city, and they showed why they were one of the biggest, if not the biggest, Australian band over the past 20 years, and why they were so popular, because their songs were just so great, they could play them so well live, and they connected with so many people. In years since, they've done a couple of things like releasing some B-sides, and also playing a one-off COVID show, which aired on their YouTube channel when we were in the middle of COVID, when no one could get together, and they just played some of their old hits, which was a really nice thing to see. But that brings us to the final question here, and that is, why was Powderfinger such a popular band here in Australia? What did they do to make it work so well? And in particular, to become like this dad rock band, now in the same sort of category as AC/DC, INXS, and so on? Well, I put it down to a few things. I think they were really able to make a palatable sound that connected well with both commercial and alternative music. It was not uncommon to hear them being played on both Triple J and Triple M at the same time. Not many bands and artists could say they could do that. As mentioned before, especially when they wrote the album Double Allergic, they were able to take a less is more approach with great success. So many bands try to overdo it, try to be so different and try to be so out there, but yet the thing that worked so well for Powderfinger was stripping it back and just focusing on writing great songs. That's what connects with the most people at the end of the day. They were able to do messaging in their song that was interesting, but also subtle at the same time. Getting political can divide your audience, but Powderfinger was able to do it in a subtle, special way. It wasn't over the top, and it wasn't preachy. It was saying things that needed to be said in an effective way.
Byrne in particular has always had a knack for delivering something not with a sledgehammer. He's got a great balance between sort of universal concepts and having perhaps a serious message in there as well, or expressing his feelings on more serious issues.
It was a turning point for us because there's always songs with that undertone, but it wasn't totally in the face.
The last thing that I would say is that when you just watch the band play live or watch them in interviews, they just come across as a bunch of Aussie mates.
Well, I didn't know we were finishing, actually. I thought, like, this is news to me, actually. So I bought a new house and everything on the next album's earnings. And
I think that comes through in their music. And at the end of the day, that's what us Australians connect with, I think. Getting together with your mates, having a yarn, playing some cricket in the backyard. That's what Powderfinger embodies to me. That's what their music kind of sounds like. And the fact that their lineup stayed pretty much the same since 1992 was a huge testament to that. I mean, these guys just seem like great mates. And in my opinion, that's what makes Powderfinger one of the best Australian bands. They've been able to connect with Australian culture in a way that not many others could say they have. Alright, thanks for watching this video, everyone. If you liked what you saw here, please like and subscribe. Feel free to comment some opinions about Powderfinger or whatever I said in this video, and I'd love for you to come back another time, and I'm hopefully going to be making a few more videos about some bands and artists from Australia and their life stories.